Hey folks, Hyrulian here, and welcome back to another little podcast thing. I gotta admit, 2023 was an overwhelmingly great year for gaming. We had so many big games release, and I was constantly playing the latest and greatest AAA release or Baldur's Gate 3. And this year, we're kind of looking at a bit of a slower year, especially since it seems like the Switch 2 will be delayed and there's not really a lot coming out from Sony. So we're kind of turning towards indie games to fill the void a little bit this year, it seems like. And as such, with the recent Steam Next Fest that happened in February, I thought it would be fun to go through my Steam wishlist and talk about some indie games that I saw recently that kind of had me a little bit hyped. So, in this little podcast thing, we're going to sit down and talk about some of the indie games I have in my wish list that I'm very excited for. And in addition to that, if I have played the Steam Next Fest demo for them, I'm also going to talk about my time checking out the demo. So hopefully this can introduce you to some potential future games that might be kind of interesting because most of these ones seem very, very interesting to me as well. And without further ado, let's hop right into it. So the first game I want to talk about today is a game called Kit Bash Model Club. And this is a new game currently in development with no release date by the Kerbal Space Program developer. And essentially, Kit Bash is a game where you build model cars and model planes. And I assume other types of vehicles are going to be included in the future as well. But it seems like that's the main focus for the initial release here. And essentially, you get to build these super realistic model vehicles and fly them around a big ass map, exploring, building new vehicles, battling against other vehicles, and that kind of thing. And there's a huge forefront for multiplayer being put on this game. I think it's up to 16 players per lobby. And so the idea is you can kind of get in with your friends and design and share your custom vehicles and then fight against them and that kind of thing. And it kind of has that whole concept of you are smaller than the world itself, so everything feels a little bit bigger and you get a little bit of a different perspective because you are just going around on this island and basically you are a little RC vehicle and there's still cars going around, there's still buildings and everything. It's something I find so fascinating about this as well, and it's very apparent in the trailer. When you're using the model planes, if you're up high enough, it starts to look like you're a normal sized plane. But then the closer you get to the ground, it starts to look like you're a small plane again. And the cars, you kind of always have that smaller perspective. But for the planes, when you're in the sky, it almost looks like you're a normal sized plane sometimes. And I really find it interesting how in depth the creation tools are already, and it's really neat as well that you can fly the planes and drive the RC vehicles from the ground or from a first person perspective. I honestly just really find this game fascinating, and although there's no release date yet, I wanted to highlight it here. So definitely go check out Kit Bash Model Club on Steam. So the next game I want to talk about is a game called Echo Point Nova, and it's by a studio called Greylock Studio. And I played a decent bit of their first game, Severed Steel, recently. And the reason I played Severed Steel is because I saw Echo Point Nova on the store page, and I went to see if the developer had any other games. And Severed Steel's a story for another day, but what I will say is that game blew me away. So naturally, I had to try out the demo for their next game, Echo Point Nova. And me and Ethan booted it up, and we Played for probably about an hour or so, and what we found was a very fast paced open world movement shooter. You basically play as like a cyborg guy riding a hoverboard around, and you're traversing these massive stages. And in the demo, you go to different areas of this open world map and start fighting waves of enemies in different areas. And you're constantly moving and doing tricks off of things and navigating this map at high speeds. And all the while, you have to kind of strategically take out different enemies. And you're kind of a fucking glass cannon because you're very strong and you're able to take out enemies very easily. But if you're not constantly moving and keeping up your momentum and staying out of harm's way, you can be killed very easily. And I actually really, really enjoyed the demo for this one. One of the main complaints we had was it's very hard to hit enemies while you are moving at high speeds. But what we found is there's some strategy involved in kind of figuring out how to effectively take out enemies while also maintaining your momentum. And me and Ethan both kind of had different methods on how to actually do it. I think my method was more to speed up to an enemy and hit them or shoot them like by pausing and hopping off the hoverboard for a second and leaving myself vulnerable, but then taking out as many enemies as possible and speeding off before others could get a shot on me. Whereas Ethan seemed to kind of line up more like easy shots by zooming past enemies really close and then shooting them at a close range, which I think is a valid strategy as well. But I was having trouble hitting shots normally in that way. And there was a couple different types of enemies in the demo, and there were some that would deploy force fields, which force you to get up close to them. So I think that's kind of the direction the game was pushing me at first. But honestly, there is so much potential in this game, and I'm very, very fascinated in it. And I really enjoyed zooming around the map. Honestly, I could play a game without any combat, just zooming around the map with that movement, and I would probably still be very satisfied. It was a very interesting sort of movement system. And just looking at the store page here, there's some other things I wanted to note as well. It is up to 4-player co-op, and the demo is co-op as well. So if you want to check out the demo, it's still available. And there's a lot of like hidden secrets and weapons around the maps, and free cosmetics that are also hidden around the map as rewards as well, which is really interesting. And at the end of the day, this one is another coming soon, so it is not confirmed for 2024. But I am certainly very excited to check it out when it does full release. The demo ends with one of the most impressive, in terms of scale, boss fights that I've ever played in a video game. And although I kept dying and I barely got to help with the boss, it was very interesting using the movement to climb on top of it. And that's all I'll say for now. You should definitely check out the demo if you're interested in seeing a really cool boss fight in action. And I think overall, Ethan really enjoyed it as well. And I can almost guarantee that whenever this game does drop, me and him are going to be dropping back in. And honestly, if nothing else that you take away from this particular segment, you should definitely at least give this game a wish list and definitely check out Severed Steel. I plan on talking about Severed Steel some more later, but for now, that's all I really want to say. So the next game I want to talk about releases very soon. So either it's already out at the time you're listening to this, or it will be out very soon. And if it is out, I urge you to check reviews before diving into this one, just in case it ends up being terrible. But the concept for this one seems really cool. And this game is called Pacific Drive. And it seems to be sort of like a combination between My Summer Car and the Stalker series, based off of what I've seen in terms of trailers so far. So it's like surviving in a mysterious borderline post-apocalypse, like, I don't know, supernatural zone. but you're upgrading and driving around in a car. So really, it's a survival game, and your character isn't really the character. Your character is more the car, and how you upgrade it changes how you survive and travel through the different zones in the game. And this seems like a very interesting concept to me. If you've never played My Summer Car before, too, a big focus of that game is you're upgrading and modifying and tweaking like every single piece of a car. And this seems to have that same kind of system, but with more of a survival, like futuristic, apocalyptic vibe. And the aesthetic of this game, I'm a huge fan of. This game looks so cool, and the trailers instantly had me hooked and interested, if I'm being honest with you. I think this is going to be a really interesting title, and I hope it kind of meets the hype that I've put forward towards it. But this game comes out February 22nd, and it really just looks like a super interesting, in-depth car customizing game with survival aspects, which is something that's never really been done before. And it seems like a big part of the game is kind of like upgrading your car for specific circumstances and making it better suited for certain environments and that kind of thing. But on top of that, the actual car customization itself is huge. You can paint the car in so many different ways, decorate it in so many different ways. There's this whole cleaning mechanic that I'm trying to understand. It's really an interesting looking title, and when it does drop in a couple days, I'm definitely going to be at least checking it out and seeing if the reviews are good. This one seems really, really fascinating. I gotta admit, it does kind of rub me the wrong way that there's a DLC announcement from the get-go. It seems like they're going to put some cosmetic stuff behind DLCs. And that's why I encourage you to kind of keep an eye on this one. It seems like it might be a little bit more of a double A title rather than an indie game, but we'll have to see. And overall, the style and the concept of the game has me very interested, and I'm definitely going to be checking it out. And it does have a demo available as well. I honestly should probably check out the demo because I am interested enough in this game to do so. But either way, that's some of my thoughts on Pacific Drive, having not played the demo, but you should definitely check the store page out. It looks pretty damn fascinating. Back when I first got into PC gaming, there was an indie game that I honestly sucked at, and I never made it very far. But despite that, I was really excited about it, and I still stuck with it all of these years later. And I'm at least a little bit further in it than I was back in 2014 when I first started playing it. And that game is Project Zomboid. And I could talk about that game all day, and that's very much a super simulation style zombie apocalypse simulator. But we are talking about up and coming indie games today, not ones from 2013, 2014. So instead, I'm going to tell you about Dread Dawn. Dread Dawn seems to be a Project Zomboid-esque game, but with more of a focus on a story. So in Project Zomboid, there's a massive map, and you kind of deploy to a random location on the map and just try to survive as long as you can. And it seems like in Dread Dawn, you kind of are in a certain specific area, and you're surviving from a certain specific spot with a bunch of NPCs and a storyline to also kind of concern you. And according to the description, you are in a city quarantine due to an unknown virus, and you play as a student who failed to catch the evacuation convoy and are forced to stay. And you basically have to explore a bunch of public facilities such as hospitals, subway stations, prisons, and schools. And there are a lot of infected. And essentially, you have to kind of go around and leave this area of the school and collect resources, and then come back and fortify and sort of create farms and that kind of thing inside this school building. So it's kind of like Project Zomboid, but with a forced base location from the looks of it, rather than you being able to pick wherever you want to build from wherever you end up, which is how it is in Project Zomboid. And the seemingly bigger emphasis on story has me kind of interested in this one because I could never really get into the role playing aspect of Project Zomboid as much as I'd like. And also, it's just interesting to see another take on that kind of style of game because it does also look like it takes a lot of inspiration graphically from Project Zomboid as well. And this one has a demo available, which I have not played, but it is also listed as coming soon with no set release date. So it might not be coming out in 2024. But Dread Dawn certainly does look like an interesting time and an interesting new take on the sort of Project Zomboid formula. So definitely check that one out on the Steam store, Dread Dawn. Now, completely changing up the theme here for a moment, next I want to talk about Balatro. And this is a game that actually comes out in less than 24 hours from the time of recording this segment. And essentially what it is it's a poker roguelike. So it seems to be a deck builder game where essentially you're playing poker, and every time you play, the rules are constantly changing as you play different Joker cards. And honestly, the style of this one immediately kind of grasped me. And it seems like your knowledge of poker doesn't really matter for this because poker is just like the basic rule set. And it gets so far away from poker as the game progresses that it's like almost something completely different as you get more and more into it. But honestly, stylistically, this game looks really, really impressive. And I love the UI design, and I love the sort of pixelated art style. And it looks really sporadic and fun and dynamic and interesting. And even though I have to admit I'm not the biggest card game fan, I definitely think I have to check this one out because it seems like just a really chaotic, fun type of unique card game type thing. So if you're a card game fan, you might enjoy this one as well. And apparently some really, really crazy shit happens in this one. And I think it kind of speaks for itself, especially if you check out the Steam page for it. But I guess the roguelike elements come in and the fact that certain Joker cards have certain effects and they kind of synergize with each other to make the rules of the game drastically different depending on which Joker cards are in play. So if you've played roguelikes with synergies before, like The Binding of Isaac, you can kind of see where this is going. But honestly, Balatro seems like a very interesting title. And there's a demo that I have not played, and it also comes out in 24 hours from recording this, so chances are you've probably got the opportunity to check out the full game if you'd like as well. So yeah, that's Balatro. Interesting looking little indie card game poker roguelike. Love the blending of the genres here. Okay, and now we're going to talk about what is probably going to be the best 2D platformer of the year, and that is Pepper Grinder. Pepper Grinder was on my radar almost instantly because it is published by the excellent Devolver Digital, and apparently this is reusing a game mechanic from the Ori games, where you're able to tunnel through dirt to traverse levels. But essentially, Pepper Grinder has you playing as a person with a drill, and your drill is your traversal method for the 2D platformer. So you can kind of launch yourself through different like dirt mounds and use your drill to attack enemies. And the movement of this 2D platformer seems very unique and very excellent. And Devolver Digital always seems to know how to pick good games to publish, honestly. And this one just seems so unique and interesting that I couldn't resist talking about it for this podcast. It seems like the 2D platforming levels are very linear, but that being said, it also seems that they have like secrets hidden in them, and they basically constantly are introducing new types of mechanics. I'm seeing in some of the trailers and screenshots on the store page that there appears to be a grappling hook as well. And you know your boy loves a good game with a grappling hook, so that's definitely something I'm going to have to keep an eye out for. But this just seems like a really solid, fun, good time 2D platformer. And I am honestly super hyped for this. The art is very beautiful as well. Very like pleasing to look at, pixelated art style. And it seems like there's a lot of collectibles and secrets and upgrading and fun to be had as well. So if you're interested, there is a demo on Steam that I have not tried yet, and this one is actually releasing in 2024. So I guarantee this is probably going to be one of the better 2D platformers of the year. But yeah, that's all I really have to say about Pepper Grinder. It's a pretty self-explanatory looking title, but it seriously looks fun and engaging, and like it's probably going to be the best one to release this year. So that's my thoughts on Pepper Grinder. And of course, while we're on the subject of Devolver Digital titles, I can't not bring up Children of the Sun. Children of the Sun is a self-described tactical puzzle shooter where basically you play as a sniper who, when they fire their bullet, they can fire it again from the perspective of wherever it landed, whether it be inside the skull of an enemy or otherwise. And this game is yet another super stylish, super unique, aesthetic looking title. And it seems to have you sort of entering different levels and kind of having to solve the puzzle of killing every enemy in the level as fast as possible using a single bullet that you can control the path of. It seems like this is just a very unique title. And it's got a lot of stuff going for it. I find it very fascinating, too, how you actually follow the travel of the sniper bullet as it goes. It kind of seems like a more uniquely styled paranormal type version of like a Sniper Elite game with a lot more focus on strategically taking out enemies rather than taking them out stealthily like in Sniper Elite. And you are fighting some kind of a cult, and there is some overarching plot here. But apparently they're designing the game to be very replayable and dynamic based on how you determine the best way to take out all of the enemies in camp. And there's also a leaderboard as well that scores you on your accuracy and efficiency. So you're able to compete with other players as well. But overall, Children of the Sun looks like a very interesting little shooter puzzle game, and it's not like a lot of other stuff out there. So definitely one to keep an eye on because of the fact that it has such a unique gameplay idea and such a unique looking art style. So a while back, I took a chance on a game called Supraland, or maybe it's called Supraland. And essentially it was a like shrunk down to a sandbox type kind of game where you went from level to level in a sort of interconnected world, solving puzzles, beating up monsters, and finding secrets in order to kind of progress a story. And I was pleasantly surprised. Essentially, it's like those other games where you're kind of shrunk down in a sandbox, except in this one, there's a much greater focus on kind of exploring and finding secrets. And Superland had a ton of secrets to find. And I really enjoyed my playtime with it, though I did not finish it. And I definitely need to go back and continue with that playthrough because it was quite a delightful game. But that being said, I'm here today to mention the sequel, which is possibly coming out this year, possibly coming out later. And that sequel, of course, is Supra World. And it is kind of just boasting being the even more expanded and even more massive sequel to Superland. There's going to be a ton more secrets. There's going to be a ton more adventures to have. It looks like just basically more Superland. And I really enjoyed the first game from what I played of it. And I'm definitely going to have to check this one out because it seems like it's going to be even better than the first game and even more interesting. So if you're interested in those kind of like shrunk down to an ant size games, definitely check out Superland. It's a very interesting little puzzle game. And honestly, I haven't really ever played anything quite like it in terms of the vibe. And if you do end up liking that, Supra World will be coming out soon as well. A lot of people describe the puzzles as very Portal-esque, and I would say that was a very valid statement in the first game. And Steam is even telling me that Supra World will be very similar to Portal as well. And there's even some sort of like Metroidvania type elements in the games where you have to like go explore and find a certain item, and then it unlocks different paths for you in previous areas as well. So that's very interesting as well. And I'm sure that's only going to be improved in the sequel, Supra World. And they're also saying in the store description for Supra World that they're introducing this new type of mechanic where you're able to do detective cases, which means you are basically figuring out who the murder culprit was in one of 5 murders, which is very fascinating as well. I don't know how that's going to play, but I'm sure it's going to be pretty damn funny considering you're playing as a toy shrunk down to a toy level to see how somebody was murdered. But yeah, this is a very interesting and kind of strange and kind of niche series. And I definitely recommend you check it out if you want to try something a little bit different. So that is the Supra series slash Supra World, Supraland, Superland. Yeah, it's an interesting one and very hard to describe. So I have to admit, this game is quite a bit earlier in development than the rest of the games I've talked about in this podcast. But I did want to highlight it either way because I think it is very fascinating. So this next game is called Metropolis 1998. And essentially it is a city builder which also features designing the buildings. So you can kind of think of it like a more honed in city builder. So you sort of build the city on a larger scale, and then you zoom in and you actually build and decorate the buildings on a smaller scale. So imagine if you were playing SimCity, and after you designed the city, you then had to use the Sims house building to build the houses. That's kind of the side of the box pitch for Metropolis 1998. And it's very clear that the game is heavily inspired by the Maxis classics, such as SimCity and the original Sims. And it kind of has a very similar vibe and aesthetic. And this game kind of only really just got started being developed. So it'll probably be quite a while before anything substantially playable is ready. But there is a demo available for it already on Steam, albeit a very limited one. And I have checked it out, and I found it to be very charming as a sort of miniature city builder version of The Sims. It shows a lot of promise. I want to put it at that. It shows a lot of promise, and I really just wanted to highlight it because I wish YesBox Studios all the best in working on this, because it seems like a kind of city builder for somebody like me who really likes to get into the fine details of things in my city builder games. So if you are a classic SimCity city builder fan, who always, just kind of wanted a modernized, more in-depth version of the classic SimCity games, Metropolis 1998 shows a lot of promise, and it's definitely worth a wish list on Steam, so you can kind of keep track on its progress and remember it released when it finally does come out. It's no secret that I'm a pretty big fan of roguelike games. I have quite a bit of hours in The Binding of Isaac, and I've played quite a large number of other roguelike games as well. But one of my favorite roguelike games has always been Streets of Rogue. Streets of Rogue is basically a roguelike with immersive sim elements. So you clear each floor of the roguelike with various different tactics of your choosing. And since it is an immersive sim, you play as all these different character classes, and you're able to kind of use your toolkit to kind of clear the objectives for the level in whatever way you please. And the developer of Streets of Rogue, Matt Dabrowski, recently announced Streets of Rogue 2, and somehow this absolute mad lad upped the ante to 150% on this game. He claims it's going to release in 2024 in early access. I have no idea how this is possible. He has upped the scope for Streets of Rogue 2 so much. Instead of generating a linear floor-based dungeon that is based on a city, he is generating an entire country with different cities for you to go explore in. And there's going to be biomes and like different themes for cities and different building types and all this different shit. He is promising here essentially the ultimate game, and it's all based off of the foundation of Streets of Rogue. So according to the store description here, it is going to be an unpredictable living open world where anything is possible. Team up with your friends or go solo to embark on a wild adventure to take down a corrupt president of a country any way you want. And they go on to compare the game to RimWorld, Valheim, Stardew Valley, Kenshi, Terraria, or Dwarf Fortress. Honestly, I don't think it's fair to compare them to those games because that might end up setting you up for disappointment. I would say that it sort of feels like a roguelike version of GTA, with a lot more focus on different sort of means to complete quests and that kind of thing. And there's basically, in this game, like all these different buildings, and you'll have missions to like go into this building and, loot a safe, or go into this building and execute a target. And depending on what type of character you are, you might be like an assassin. You can like sneak in and assassinate them quietly and exit. Or you might be like a football player and you can smash through the wall and like tackle them and smash them through another wall to kill them. There's like tons of different ways to go about completing your objectives, and that's where the immersive sim elements come in. But the reason I would almost compare Streets of Rogue 2 to GTA is because of the fact that it's like open world and you're driving around cars and you're going into these different buildings. This game is so hard to describe because of how massive the scope is. And honestly, it feels like it's going to be insane when it comes out. And the store page for Streets of Rogue also seems like it's kind of aware of the fact that it's a little bit insane. But the sequel also promises to allow you to build your own farm, and you can turn it into a factory and do all this shit. You can stage a zombie virus outbreak, break into mayor's offices of different cities and take them hostage. There are so many different mechanics in this game, and if it was any other developer, I would be very concerned. And honestly, if he releases it into early access in 2024, like he's claiming that he will, it definitely will not have all of the features that he is promising right now. But what I can tell you is Streets of Rogue is pretty much one of my favorite roguelike games to ever release, and I really, really enjoyed it. And the sequel seems to just be the same thing, but with a massive open world map instead of a level based linear map. And if that sounds interesting to you, definitely check out the game. Here's a little bit of a coverage of the main features of the game to try and describe it a little bit better. I know it's probably hard to follow what I'm talking about with this game, but you can probably tell by how excitedly I'm talking about it that I'm pretty hyped. But here is the developer's explanation of some of the features in Streets of Rogue 2. Play the game your way. Don't want to kill anybody? That's cool. Want to hack computers? Got you covered. In the mood for some laid-back mineral grinding or carrot farming? Go for it. Endless replayability. You can play for an hour or sit down and binge 9 hours of the game, and the randomly generated worlds and massive gameplay variety will quickly make it one of your go-to forever games. And these are big, big claims coming from the developer. And honestly, I don't know if he's going to be able to meet the hype for this sequel, but I'm still excited either way, and I'm definitely going to pick it up and play it immediately. Easy to learn, tough to master. User-friendly enough for anyone to jump in and play, but it has enough complexity and stake to satiate the hardcore among us. And he's not talking about that one video game. Online and local cooperative play. Yes, there is split screen or like shared screen in the first game. I don't know if it'll be split screen in this one or not, but it was very fun in the first game, and I'm sure it'll continue to be fun in this game. And they're saying build your empire together or make your own unique marks on opposite sides of the game world. So probably split screen in this one instead of shared screen like the first game. Play a large number of different classes. Scientists, hackers, vampires, thieves, wrestlers, gorillas, or some oddball combination of all of these. So character class customization seems to be a bigger focus for this one. They're boasting super advanced NPC AI, a huge variety of items, shrink rays, hypnotizing devices, boom boxes, bear traps, banana peels, and a lot of guns. The gadgets in the first Streets of Rogue game were insanely fun. And there was like a character that let you like mind control people. I think it was an alien. And it was so fun to mind control people and use that as a means to like make them run into a water heater and have it blow up to kill themselves for like completing different objectives. And it's one of those things where you got to try it out to really understand it. And then here's some other things here. Build your dream home, dream fortress, dream cave, dream shack, or steal someone else's home, or sleep under the stars. The game does not care. And the building mechanics seem to be very in-depth, strangely enough. The first game featured no building whatsoever, so I'm interested to see how that's going to go. Apparently, he's building the random generated like chunks in the game as well to make it so everything in the game is theoretically buildable by the players as well. And like certain items that you can put in your houses and build in your houses are going to be unlockable. Vehicles are in the game now, and apparently your posse of ne'er-do-wells can be in a van. You can drive up solo in a souped-up coupe, glide across the water in your very own speedboat, or tinker around and create your own personal fantasy ride. So they're boasting customizable vehicles as well. And also the game itself, the first game had these things called mutations, where essentially you could change the game to play in any number of different ways. Like every body explodes when they die, stuff like that, like huge mutation customization type things for your runs. And they're boasting that is returning as well. You can make the game permadeath, make the game easier. You can, do all sorts of shit. The developer is boasting a lot of shit for this game, and I do not know if he's going to be able to meet expectations, but needless to say, it looks really, really good. And I watched the February developer blog for this one, and it looks like it's coming along pretty well, and it's very interesting. But that being said, this is definitely a game to hold your expectations with until something more substantial releases. And yeah, Matt Dabrowski claims it's going to release in 2024 in some shape or form. So that's definitely going to be something to check out down the line. But either way, you should definitely check out Streets of Rogue 1 because it's already incredible and it's already out. But anyway, I hope some part of that 10-minute rant on Streets of Rogue was understandable. Now, as I calm down from my 10-minute rant about Streets of Rogue 2, I want to take a second to talk about a little bit more of a chill game by a company that I've been following since 2020 named Sock Pop. Sock Pop, basically, for a little background, is a game studio that has a Patreon page where you can pledge $3 a month and you get a new game every single month. And I have been subscribed to them for quite a while now. And most of their games are essentially just short little tech demos that have a very unique art style and usually have some very interesting concepts and ideas. But very occasionally, Sock Pop releases a more substantial title. And if you're subscribed to their $3 tier on their Patreon when that game releases, you get the game as well. And if you don't subscribe, you can also just go buy their games on Steam or itch.io when they release. But Sock Pop has been a little bit slow with some of their game releases the last few months because of the fact that they are working on a new large-scale title named Grun. And Grun is essentially a small story-based exploration game where you are a gardener working on a property in the Dutch countryside in a mundane village. And you're essentially hired to sort of clean up this person's yard. But the owner of the garden is not around and their house is off limits. So you basically have to explore the surrounding mysterious town and ask some of the townsfolk for any information on the owner. And you sort of have to find the tools to complete the gardening job on your own so you don't disappoint the owner of the garden who you've been hired to clean up, that you've been hired to clean up. And what this seems like is it's going to be an interesting, fun little short story game with a very unique art style, apparently very satisfying very satisfying gardening, dark mysteries in a scenic village, multiple endings to the game, and lovely weather apparently. And I've come to expect from Sock Pop just a nice little, pretty short, enjoyable, stylish game. And it seems like Grun is going to be another one of those titles. I'm featuring this one late into the episode because, honestly, it's one of my most hyped indie games of the year because I've pretty much enjoyed everything I've played by Sock Pop. But it's interesting to see them kind of doing something a little bit different and focusing a little bit longer on a game with something as substantial as a story, because they're not really known for story games. So if you're interested in strange, interesting, mysterious games, definitely give Grum a wish list. And honestly, any of the Sock Pop lineup are just very fascinating and unique games. They have some really, really interesting titles. And I'm sure at some point I'll sit down and do a podcast about Sock Pop specifically because I've enjoyed so many of their games over the years. And subscribing to their Patreon for $3 a month was one of the most interesting and fun things I've ever done because I always have a small and unique little indie game to boot up when I'm not sure what to play. So if that sounds at all interesting to you, you should definitely check out the Sock Pop Patreon as well. Last year, I checked out this very interesting indie game called Hypnospace Outlaws, and I even hesitate to call it a game. Hypnospace Outlaws is more of a 90s internet simulation game with sort of an alternate history spin slash storyline. Essentially, when you boot up the game, you're launching into an imaginary operating system that was designed for a computer built to be worn while you're sleeping that works in your mind while you're dreaming. And you play as a basically police officer for the internet, aka like an admin, and you have to explore this fake 90s internet and police different stuff like cyberbullying, content infringement, illegal activities like selling drugs and illegal cryptocurrency and stuff like that. And when I say there's no game like Hypnospace Outlaws, I mean it. I have never played anything like this title ever before in my entire life. And somehow it's been out since March of 2019, and I just did not know about it. But I'm so glad I picked it up finally and got to experience this absolute gem. And honestly, this game just like kind of blew me away with its interesting concept and super unique atmosphere and aesthetic. And honestly, it's genuinely funny, which is rare for a game these days. Like, this game legitimately had me smiling from the minute I started it to the minute I stopped. It was so enjoyable. It's so cool and it's so unique. And there's all these mini games and interesting websites to explore and find in the game. And like, you can find like GIFs and music files on this fake internet, and there's some really catchy and fun songs in the game. There's a lot of like meta commentary on a bunch of 90s stuff. Like, they have a knockoff Pokemon, and it's being thrown in your face constantly and shown off as like the most badass thing ever. It's a really fun and interesting and unique game. And if you haven't checked out Hypnospace Outlaws, I definitely recommend you do. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about the sequel, Dream Settler. And Dream Settler, as of now, does not have a release date. But Dream Settler is a game that I am insanely hyped for. Because if Hypnospace Outlaw was a 90s internet simulator, then Dream Settler is the same thing for the 2000s, which is when I was growing up and when I first experienced the internet. So instead of booting into like a 90s operating system, instead you're booting more into like a knockoff of Windows XP, and you're using what would have been in the early 2000s like Internet Explorer. And it's essentially going to be the same thing as Hypnospace Outlaws, but for a 2000s internet experience. And I'm insanely hyped. The developers have been working on this for a very, very long time, and it's to the point now where people who have tried it early say that it feels more like a true operating system at this point than a game. And that has me hyped up because I love checking out weird and obscure operating systems. And the first game already had that quite a big way, even though the operating system felt quite limited. So I can imagine that this is going to be even more impressive. But in this game, you are working on the SleepNet as a private investigator. And you essentially are solving different cases. Instead of being a cop, you are just a regular guy using this new operating system, this new imaginary operating system in your sleep. And you can make friends and enemies amongst Dream Settler peers and the powers that be across the SleepNet. in order to sort of solve cases of some sorts. And just like Hypnospace Outlaw, you have your own imaginary virtual computer that you get to customize with items you find on the internet, such as backgrounds, themes for the operating system, different sound effects, music files that you can play on the virtual operating system. There's going to be even more mini games, software, that kind of thing. And honestly, I'm so hyped for this game because I grew up on the 2000s internet, and the Hypnospace Outlaw game, even though I didn't grow up on the 90s internet, felt so nostalgic to me and so fun and cool. So I can only imagine those feelings are going to be even more greatly expanded in Dream Settler. But needless to say, I don't think I've ever been so hyped for an indie game in my entire life. This game has me so incredibly hyped, mostly because of the fact that it's going to be an alternate reality, futuristic, early 2000s operating system game with a whole story and a whole vibe that has kind of been long forgotten. And if it's anything as stylish and anything as interesting as Hypnospace Outlaw, this is probably going to be my game of the year whenever it does drop because of how much I enjoyed Hypnospace Outlaw. So this game looks really, really insanely fun and insanely cool. And I highly recommend you go check it out on Steam if a virtual operating system game sounds interesting to you like it does to me. And if it does, definitely check out Hypnospace Outlaw if you haven't as well. It's really, really neat. And the last thing I want to mention as well is there is another game in this sort of continuity as well that you should be aware of called Slayers X. And essentially, in Hypnospace Outlaw, there are certain characters who are running their own blogs. And one of them is this character who basically is just obsessed with anything badass. And as such, he talks about making his own Duke Nukem type game. And they actually released the Duke Nukem type game as a real game. So if you're into boomer shooters, specifically like Duke Nukem style boomer shooters, I own it. I haven't played it yet, but Slayers X looks really interesting and really funny. And technically, the continuity connects to Hypnospace Outlaws as well. But it's basically a Duke Nukem clone, but like with like freaking 8-year-old like elementary, early middle school type humor. And it is really ridiculous and silly and goofy and stupid and weird. But yeah, honestly, I am a big fan of everything that No More Robots has been publishing. And specifically Hypnospace Outlaw was just such a cool game. And I cannot wait for the sequel, Dream Settlers. I'm sure it's going to be even better and even more interesting. And I hope they give it as much time as it needs to cook so it can be just like another one of the most unique games of all time, just like Hypnospace Outlaws was. Well, alrighty, folks, there we have it. A bunch of indie games that I'm excited for. I think if it wasn't obvious, I have a very strange taste in games, but hopefully some of the indie games that I talked about today sounded interesting to you, or were something at least you could put on your radar and maybe consider checking out. Keep in mind, I haven't tried any of these, or I've at least just tried demos, but I haven't tried the full releases of any of these. So there's a good chance some of them could end up being scammy, money grabby, or just flat out not good. And I apologize if that's the case. Don't take this as a proper recommendation to buy the game, or take this as a proper recommendation to check the game out and make your own decision. But I really enjoyed talking about these games, and I really think 2024 is going to be kind of the year for indie games before 2025, when GTA 6 comes out and whatever the fuck Nintendo's been working on releases, and hopefully Sony releases some new big games as well. There's a big void left in 2024 after how amazing 2023 was for games, that I'm hopeful that indie games can kind of pick up the slack for and fill. And we'll see how many of the games in this podcast actually release this year and how many end up releasing in 2025. But either way, I feel like most of them are pretty exciting and interesting and fun sounding. So hopefully there was something here that sounded like something you would like. And anyway, folks, thanks for listening to another episode of the Switched Podcast. I hope you have yourselves a fantastic day, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.